My name is Claire Bennett, and I'm 31 years old. On the surface, I probably look like the kind of woman who has everything handled: calm voice, structured days, a closet full of neutral blazers, a business that runs because I built it to survive even when I'm not in the room. People see that version of me now and assume I've always been this steady. I haven't. I built my life from a place that felt a lot more like panic than confidence. I started my logistics consulting firm in my mid-20s with a secondhand laptop, two unreliable clients, and a level of anxiety that made sleep feel optional. Those first years were brutal. 80-hour weeks, cheap noodles, spreadsheet after spreadsheet, reinvesting every spare dollar because I couldn't afford to fail. There were nights I sat on the floor of my apartment, back against the couch, staring at invoices and wondering if I was building something real or just dragging myself through a slow-motion collapse. Then, about 2 years ago, things shifted. One major contract became two. Two became recurring accounts. The niche I had spent years understanding finally started paying off. The business stopped feeling fragile. For the first time in my adult life, I could breathe without calculating what that breath cost. And around that same time, my life included Ethan Mercer. Ethan was 28 when we met. He was working a front desk job at a boutique hotel, charming everyone who crossed his path while quietly carrying around this bigger dream he never seemed able to touch. He wanted to work in the art world, not as a painter, not as the tortured genius in a loft somewhere, but as a curator. He loved history, composition, stories behind objects. He could stand in front of one painting and talk about it like it had a pulse. It was one of the first things I loved about him. My life at that point had become all structure, deadlines, and controlled outcomes. Ethan felt like color breaking across a gray wall. He was warm where I was reserved, instinctive where I was methodical. He made ordinary evenings feel softer. I'd come home from a 14-hour day and find him in my kitchen making pasta, music playing low, talking about some exhibit he wanted to see, as if the world still held things worth being excited about. I didn't just fall for him, I believed in him. At the time, he talked a lot about how trapped he felt. He hated the hotel job, said it drained him, said every shift made him feel like he was standing outside his real life, watching it happen to other people. He wanted to take art history courses, apply for unpaid internships, start networking in the gallery world, but every path toward that dream seemed to require time and money he didn't have. By then, for the first time, I had both. So I made him an offer. I told him to quit the job he hated, focus on his studies, take the unpaid internships if he got them, build the life he kept talking about. I told him I'd handle the practical side until he found his footing. I really thought that was what love looked like. Not rescuing, not control, partnership. I thought we were investing in our future together. And I did invest. The apartment downtown with the exposed brick and absurd rent because it was closer to the galleries and had the right energy for the life he wanted. I paid for it. $3,500 a month. The Audi lease, $800, and my name was tied to it. I added him as an authorized user on 2 of my credit cards. Groceries, clothes, museum memberships, dinners, streaming services, art books, delivery subscriptions, supplies for portfolio presentations, all of it passed through my account so naturally that after a while it stopped feeling like money and started feeling like weather. Constant, expected, background. I never held it over him, not once. That part matters, because I know how stories like this sound after the fact, like there must have been conditions, rules, strings, some silent contract where generosity curdled into ownership. There wasn't. I didn't check the statements. I didn't ask for receipts. I didn't make him earn softness from me. My entire professional life was built around managing details for other people. In my personal life, I wanted one place where trust could just be trust. And for 3 years, I let myself believe that was what we had. Tuesday was our 3-year anniversary. I had reservations at a restaurant he'd been wanting to try for months. One of those places with impossible booking windows and tiny portions arranged like sculpture. I'd bought him a sapphire pendant a few days earlier. Simple, elegant, not flashy. Something intimate. Something chosen carefully. I left work early that night because I wanted to surprise him before dinner. I remember being in a good mood. That detail embarrasses me now more than it should. I walked into the apartment carrying the small gift box in one hand, already thinking about the expression on his face when he saw it. The place was quiet. No music, no voice from the kitchen, no shoes by the door except mine. I checked the time, 7:15 p.m. Then my phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. I found someone else. I want nothing more to do with you. That was it. No explanation, no apology, no fight leading up to it, no trembling conversation across a table, just a message delivered into the center of my chest like a blade slid cleanly between ribs. I stood in the entryway for a long time, staring at the screen. I think shock is quieter than most people imagine. It wasn't dramatic. I didn't drop the box. I didn't scream. I just stopped feeling attached to my own body for a minute. My hand went cold around my phone. My breathing turned shallow. It felt as if something inside me had been scooped out so quickly my mind hadn't caught up yet. My first instinct was humiliatingly normal. Why? Who? What happened? What did I miss? I almost typed all of it. Then another text came in before I could. It was only one sentence. It's Olivia. We reconnected, and I'm done pretending. Olivia. His ex-girlfriend. He had mentioned her before in that vague, harmless way. People mention old relationships they swear no longer matter. A few stories, a few eye-roll comments, a little history wrapped in dismissal. Nothing that ever sounded like a threat. And yet there she was, suddenly standing in the middle of my life without even needing to appear. For a moment, I felt something hot and blinding rise in me. Not heartbreak, not even jealousy. Humiliation. The kind that strips the skin off your pride in one clean motion. I had spent 3 years building stability around a man who was now telling me, by text, on our anniversary, that he had gone back to the woman he once claimed was fully in his past. I looked around the apartment I was paying for and understood, in one terrible instant, how completely I had mistaken access for intimacy. Then the feeling changed. It cooled. I can't explain it any better than that. Something inside me went very still. The brutality of what he had sent me created its own kind of clarity. There was no ambiguity, no room for negotiation. He didn't want distance. He didn't want a break. He wanted nothing more to do with me. So I gave him exactly that. I texted back 3 words. As you wish. Then I put my phone on silent, set the gift box on the kitchen counter, and opened my laptop. The shift in me was almost frightening. It was like some hidden switch flipped. 1 second, I was a woman who had just been discarded. The next, I was the owner of a consulting firm addressing a terminated arrangement with interconnected liabilities. The emotion would come later. First, there was paperwork. I logged into my banking portal and removed Ethan as an authorized user on both credit cards. The deactivation was immediate. I stared at the confirmation screen for a second, letting the plainness of it settle over me. Years of trust, erased with a checkbox and a timestamp. Next was the car. The lease wasn't simple, but the automatic payment was. I canceled it. Then the apartment. That one took longer. The lease was under my name. I found the rental agreement PDF, read the break clause twice, and drafted the formal notice to property management. 60 days. 2-month penalty. Expensive, but clean. Clean mattered to me. I changed passwords on every account tied to the two of us. Streaming, meal kits, shared subscriptions, cloud storage, gym access. Even the stupid boutique coffee membership he'd insisted was worth it for the beans. One by one, I stripped my life back down to what was actually mine. By the time I got to the phone plan, my hands had stopped shaking. 45 minutes after the worst text of my life, the structure holding his new freedom in place had started collapsing quietly beneath him. And still I heard nothing. No call, no explanation, no sudden pounding on the door, just silence. That silence told me more than anything else could have. He already thought he had landed somewhere better. I packed a small overnight bag, left the sapphire necklace on the counter beside the unopened wine I had bought for dinner, and called my older sister Lauren. When she heard my voice, she didn't ask many questions. She just said, "Come here." I did, and as I drove across the city with the radio off and the night pressing against the windshield, my phone lit up once on the passenger seat. Another text from Ethan. "This is for the best. Please don't make this harder than it needs to be." I looked at it at a red light, and for the first time that night, I almost laughed. Because he still thought he was the one leaving with the power. The first few days after I left were quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet. Not the kind that heals you. This was the kind that presses in from all sides, like the world is holding its breath and waiting to see if you'll break first. I stayed at my sister's place. She gave me the guest room without asking questions I wasn't ready to answer. That's the thing about people who really know you. They can tell the difference between silence that needs to be filled and silence that needs to be protected. I slept more than I expected. Not well, but deeply. Like my body was trying to shut down everything it couldn't process yet. During the day, I worked. Of course, I worked. Spreadsheets, calls, contracts, numbers that behave the way numbers are supposed to behave. Predictable, honest. If something breaks in business, there's always a reason. A miscalculation, a missed detail, a bad decision you can trace back step by step. People aren't like that. By Friday, the silence ended. It started with a single text. Claire, my card just got declined. Is something wrong? I was in the middle of reviewing a logistics report when it came through. I stared at the notification for a second, then set my phone back down without opening it. 10 minutes later, another one. Did you change something on the account? Then another. Hey, this isn't funny. By the time I picked up my phone again an hour later, there were 6 messages. The tone had already shifted from confusion to irritation. You need to fix this. I have things I need to pay for. I read them all in order, slowly, like I was reviewing a document instead of a conversation. Not once did he ask how I was. Not once did he mention what he had done. Just inconvenience, just expectation. I locked my phone again. By the next morning, the messages had escalated. Claire, my car payment didn't go through either. What are you doing? This affects you too, you know. Your name is on that lease. I almost smiled at that. Almost. Because it wasn't concern for me, it was a bluff. A pressure tactic wrapped in false logic. The kind of move someone makes when they still think you're playing the same game they are. But I wasn't. I didn't reply. Instead, I screenshotted every message and forwarded them to my lawyer. Mr. Harrison had been my family's go-to for years. He handled contracts for my business, disputes when they came up, anything that required precision instead of emotion. He was in his late 50s, sharp-eyed, calm in a way that felt earned rather than practiced. When I sat across from him earlier that week and explained everything, he didn't interrupt once. He just listened, fingers steepled, occasionally making a small note on a yellow pad. When I finished, there was a brief silence. Then he leaned back in his chair, looked at me over his glasses, and said, "Well, it appears you've encountered someone who mistakes generosity for obligation." That sentence stayed with me, because it reframed everything. This wasn't heartbreak anymore. It was entitlement. Now, reading Ethan's messages, I could see it clearly, not just in what he was saying, but in what he wasn't. There was no recognition of the line he had drawn, no understanding that nothing more to do with you actually meant something. To him, it had been emotional. To me, it was structural, and structures collapse when you remove their foundation. By Monday morning, things escalated. I was in my office when an email came through with the subject line, "Urgent, representation notice." I opened it. It was from a downtown law firm. The message was formal, polished, and just aggressive enough to sound intimidating if you didn't know better. The attorney stated he was representing Ethan Mercer and required immediate contact regarding my sudden and malicious cessation of established financial support. I read that line twice. Malicious cessation. The phrase was almost impressive in its audacity. I forwarded the email to Mr. Harrison with a single line. "Thoughts?" He called me within 15 minutes. I answered, already knowing what he was going to say from the tone of his voice. "Claire," he began, calm as ever, "this is what we call noise." I leaned back in my chair, letting out a slow breath. "He's claiming I cut him off unfairly," I said. "That I, owed him something?" There was a soft chuckle on the other end. "No," he said. "He's hoping you think you do." That distinction mattered. He explained it simply. We weren't married. There were no joint assets, no contractual obligations tying me to his expenses. Everything I had provided, rent, car, lifestyle, fell under voluntary support. And voluntary support can end the moment the relationship ends, especially when the relationship was ended by the recipient of that support. Legally, there was nothing there. Emotionally, that was a different conversation, but not one the law cared about. Mr. Harrison drafted a response that same afternoon. Clean, direct, almost surgical. It stated that the relationship had been terminated by Ethan himself, that all financial contributions made during the relationship were voluntary and non-binding, that there was no legal basis for any claim of continued support, and finally, that all future communication should be directed through him. I didn't need to say anything. The structure spoke for me. For about 24 hours, things were quiet again. Then the second message came, not directly to me, to my lawyer. This time it wasn't noise. It was strategy. Ethan's attorney sent a formal proposal titled Confidential Transitional Support Agreement. I read it sitting at my desk, one hand resting against my temple. The language was polished, almost sympathetic. It talked about Ethan's significant personal and professional investment in our relationship, about how my abrupt withdrawal of financial support had caused him emotional distress and career disruption. It was carefully written to make him sound like a victim. And me, like the villain who had pulled the rug out from under someone vulnerable. Then I got to the actual demand. They wanted me to continue paying his apartment rent for 6 months, continue covering the car lease, and provide a one-time payment of $20,000 to facilitate a smooth transition and avoid prolonged and public legal proceedings. I stared at that number for a long time, not because I was considering it, because I was trying to understand the mindset behind asking for it. He left me. He told me he wanted nothing more to do with me. And now, through a lawyer, he was asking me to keep funding his life, while he built a new one with someone else. I let out a quiet breath and closed the document. Then I picked up my phone and called Mr. Harrison. When he answered, I didn't bother softening it. They want 6 months of support, I said, and $20,000. There was a pause, then a short, amused exhale. Of course they do, he replied. What do we do? I asked. His answer came without hesitation. We do nothing. I frowned slightly, even though he couldn't see me. Nothing? Nothing, he repeated. Claire, this isn't a negotiation. It's a shakedown. They're testing whether you'll pay to make this go away. I leaned back in my chair again, staring at the ceiling. And if I don't? They have no case, he said calmly. And if they try to build one, they'll spend more money than they could ever recover. It would be professional suicide for that attorney to actually file this. There was something grounding about the certainty in his voice. Not emotional, not reactive. Just factual. They're counting on you being uncomfortable, he added. Counting on you wanting this resolved quietly. But legally, you've already done everything right. I nodded slowly, even though, again, he couldn't see it. Okay, I said, then we ignore it. We ignore it, he confirmed. After I hung up, I sat there for a few minutes, letting everything settle. The betrayal. The entitlement. The attempt to rewrite reality into something that made him the victim. And underneath all of it, something else was starting to take shape. Not anger. Not yet. Clarity. Because this wasn't just about him leaving. It was about what he thought he could take with him. And for the first time since that night, I felt something close to certainty. He wasn't done pushing, which meant this wasn't over. Not even close. The first real crack didn't come from a lawyer. It came from a phone call. Saturday morning, just past 10. I was in my kitchen at my sister's place, halfway through a cup of coffee that had already gone cold when my phone lit up with an unknown number. I almost didn't answer. But something in me said this was connected. Hello? Hi, Claire. This is Judith, the property manager from your apartment building. Her voice was tight, controlled, but strained in that way people get when something is actively unfolding around them. My spine straightened immediately. Yes, I said. What's going on? There was a brief pause, like she was choosing her words carefully. Your former partner is here, she said. He's with a woman. They're asking for access to the unit. Of course he was. I closed my eyes for a second, letting out a slow breath. Is he on the lease? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. No, Judith replied firmly. The lease is entirely under your name. That's why I haven't let them up. Good, I said quietly. Another pause. He's not taking that well, she added. I could hear something in the background now. Muffled voices. Movement. A door opening and closing somewhere nearby. And the woman? I asked. She introduced herself as Olivia, Judith said. She's more aggressive. I almost smiled at that. Of course she was. I stepped away from the counter and leaned against the wall, grounding myself in something solid. Don't let them in, I said, under any circumstances. I won't, Judith assured me. But they're saying there are personal items inside. He's claiming you locked him out without notice. There it was. The first attempt to reshape the story. He left, I said, my voice calm. And he made it very clear he wanted nothing more to do with me. Everything inside that apartment is legally mine or documented. If he wants his personal belongings, we'll arrange a supervised pickup. Judith exhaled softly, like that answer gave her something to stand on. Understood, she said. I'll hold the line. Thank you, I replied. As I ended the call, my phone buzzed again almost instantly. A message. From Ethan. You can't just lock me out like this. I stared at the screen for a moment before opening the full thread. There were more? My portfolio is in there. I have a review next week. Judith is being ridiculous. Fix this. They called me from the dealership. The payment didn't go through. What are you doing? I scrolled further, and then I saw the shift. Olivia says, this is insane. You're acting like a child. You're going to ruin your own credit over this. Is that what you want? I let out a quiet breath. There it was again. Pressure. Bluff. Control wrapped in accusation. But what stood out most wasn't what he said. It was what he didn't. No apology. No acknowledgement. No recognition of the fact that he had detonated the relationship himself. Just expectation that the structure would remain intact, even after he walked away from it. I locked my phone, then unlocked it again. Not to reply. To document. Every message, every timestamp, every word. I screenshotted everything and sent it to Mr. Harrison with a short note. Direct contact continues. Also attempted access to property. His reply came less than 10 minutes later. Good, let him keep talking. I almost laughed at that, because he was right. Every message wasn't just noise. It was evidence. By the afternoon, the situation escalated. Judith called again. They're still here, she said, her voice tighter now. He's getting louder. I could hear him this time. Faint, but unmistakable. The edge in his voice. The frustration bleeding through whatever version of composure he was trying to maintain. He's saying you're being vindictive, Judith continued. That you're holding his work hostage. I leaned my head back against the wall and closed my eyes. Is he threatening anything? I asked. No, she said. Then, after a beat, but the woman he's with is. That didn't surprise me. What is she saying? I asked. She told me we could make this easy or make this complicated, Judith replied flatly. Suggested there might be consequences if we don't cooperate. I opened my eyes slowly. Did she now? There was something almost fascinating about it. The confidence. The assumption that pressure would work. That intimidation would override legality. They're trying to get past the lobby, Judith added, but security is holding them. Good, I said again, my voice even. If they escalate further, call the police. There was a brief silence. I was hoping you'd say that, Judith admitted. We ended the call shortly after. And for the first time since this started, I felt something shift again. Not just clarity, control. Because everything they were doing was predictable. They thought urgency would force my hand. They thought noise would create leverage. They thought if they pushed hard enough, I would fold just to make it stop. But they didn't understand something fundamental. I don't respond to pressure. I respond to structure. And right now, the structure was entirely on my side. That evening, the messages changed tone again. Claire, this is getting ridiculous. I need my things. You're making this way harder than it has to be. Then, you know Olivia's right about you, right? I paused at that one. Read it twice. Then once more. Because there it was. The attempt to provoke, to drag me back into something emotional, reactive, messy. I didn't take the bait. I set my phone down and walked away. But the real shift, the one that changed the direction of everything, didn't come from him directly. It came the next morning, from someone else. A message request on Instagram. I almost ignored it, until I saw the name. Lena, one of the junior curators at the gallery where Ethan had been interning. We had met a few times, brief conversations, nothing significant. I opened the message. Hey, I don't know if I should be reaching out, but I thought you might want to see this. There was a screenshot attached. I tapped it, and there it was. Ethan's private story. A photo of him, eyes slightly red, expression carefully composed to look vulnerable. The caption read, "Finally free from a controlling, financially manipulative relationship. I stayed longer than I should have because I believed in loyalty. Walking away was the hardest thing I've ever done. Grateful for the people who showed me what real support looks like. I stared at it for a long time, not because it hurt, because it was precise, calculated. Every word chosen to reshape reality into something that served him. He wasn't just leaving. He was rewriting the story so that I became the reason he had to. I zoomed in slightly, reading it again. Controlling, manipulative, support, loyalty. It was almost impressive. If you didn't know the truth, if you hadn't seen the numbers, the leases, the contracts, the quiet, steady flow of everything I had built being redirected into his life without condition. I felt something stir in my chest then. Not anger, something colder, recognition. Because this wasn't just about money anymore. This was reputation. And reputation spreads in ways you can't always control. I exited the screenshot and typed a short reply to Lena. Thank you for sending this. Then I locked my phone, set it face down on the table, and sat there in silence for a long moment. Because for the first time since that night, I understood exactly where this was going. He thought he was winning the story. He thought he had already positioned himself as the victim. He thought the worst thing I could do was stop paying. He was wrong. Because the most dangerous thing in this situation wasn't what I was doing. It was what I wasn't. By the time we scheduled the move out, everything had become procedural. That was the word Mr. Harrison used. Keep it procedural, he told me. No emotion, no improvisation, just structure. So that's what I built. A controlled window. Saturday morning. 10 o'clock. 2 neutral movers hired under my name. A full inventory list prepared in advance. Personal effects only. No furniture, no electronics, no ambiguity, and most importantly, both lawyers present to supervise. Clean, contained. Final. At least that was the plan. At 9:45 a.m., my phone rang. It was one of the movers. "Hi, Ms. Bennett," he said, a little uncertain. "We're downstairs at the building. The gentleman and a woman are already here. They're saying their lawyer is running late, and they want to get started." My stomach tightened instantly. Of course they did. "Do not let them into the unit," I said, my voice sharpening. "No one enters until my lawyer is there." There was a brief pause on the other end. They're already in the lobby," he admitted. I closed my eyes. Not ideal, but not critical. "Then you hold them there," I said. "No access to the apartment, no exceptions." "Yes, ma'am," he replied quickly. I hung up and immediately called Mr. Harrison. He picked up on the first ring. "They're early," I said, "and their lawyer isn't there yet." "I figured as much," he replied calmly. "I'm 10 minutes out. Tell your movers to stand their ground. No entry without me present." "I already did," I said. "Good," he replied. "Then let them try." Let them try. That phrase stayed with me because it implied something simple. They weren't a threat. They were a problem to be managed. For the next 20 minutes, I didn't hear anything. Then my phone buzzed. A text from the mover. "They're trying to come up. We're holding them." Another message followed almost immediately. "The guy is saying he hired us. The woman is yelling." I exhaled slowly, picturing it. Ethan trying to reassert control by rewriting reality in real time. Olivia amplifying it, pushing harder, louder, faster. Same pattern. Different setting. Then the phone rang again. This time the mover didn't bother with small talk. "Ma'am, they're saying the items inside belong to them. Furniture, TV, desk, all of it." Of course they were. "They're wrong," I said simply. "Stick to the inventory list. Nothing moves without approval." There was hesitation in his voice. "They're getting pushy." "I understand," I said, "but you're not alone. My lawyer is almost there, and if they escalate, you call building security or the police." That last word landed. There was a shift in his tone. "Yes, ma'am," he said again, firmer this time. We ended the call. And then, for the first time that morning, I felt something close to anticipation. Because this wasn't just about retrieving belongings anymore. This was about lines, and whether they would respect them or try to cross them. 10 minutes later, my phone lit up again. But this time, it wasn't the mover. It was Mr. Harrison. "I'm here," he said. "Stay where you are. I'll handle it." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "Okay." Then I hung up and waited. I didn't go to the apartment. That had been a deliberate choice. This wasn't about confrontation. It was about containment. But Mr. Harrison called me shortly after, and as he spoke, I could hear everything unfolding in the background. Voices, movement, tension. "I've just arrived," he said calmly, "and your former partner is currently attempting to move a television that is very clearly not his." I let out a slow breath. "Of course he is." There was a pause, then a faint shift in his tone. Not louder, just sharper. "Sir," he said, his voice now directed away from the phone, "I'm going to need you to put that down." I could hear Ethan's voice faintly in the background. Agitated. Defensive. "She said it was a gift." "No," Mr. Harrison cut in, still calm. "What she said, or did not say, is irrelevant. I have documentation for every item in this apartment. That television is registered under Ms. Bennett's name, along with the desk, the shelving unit, and, if I'm not mistaken, the mattress you're currently standing next to." Silence. Then Olivia's voice. Sharp. "Are you seriously going to do this right now? Over furniture?" "Yes," Mr. Harrison replied evenly. "I am." Another pause. "He's entitled to his things," she snapped. "And he will receive them," Mr. Harrison said, "as outlined in the inventory list agreed upon by both parties' legal representatives. Anything outside of that list remains here." I could almost picture the moment. The shift. The realization that this wasn't going to bend. Ethan tried again. "This is ridiculous," he said. "Claire gave me those things. You can't just—" "I can," Mr. Harrison interrupted, "and I am, because the receipts say otherwise." Receipts. That word again. Simple. Final. I heard movement in the background. Something being set down. A little too hard. Then a different tone entered the space. Frustration. Cracking through control. "You're making this way harder than it needs to be," Ethan said, his voice tighter now. "No," Mr. Harrison replied calmly. "You did that when you decided to ignore the terms of this process." Silence. Then, "If you attempt to remove any item not listed," Mr. Harrison continued, still measured, "I will be forced to advise my client to file a police report for attempted theft." That landed. Hard. Even through the phone, I could feel it. The line had been drawn. Clearly. Legally. Irrevocably. Another long pause. Then footsteps. Boxes being moved. No more arguments. No more performance. Just compliance. They're backing down, Mr. Harrison said quietly into the phone. For now. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Good, I said. But it wasn't over, because 20 minutes later, he called again. This time, there was something different in his voice. Not concern. Not stress. Just irritation. They've left, he said, but not gracefully. What happened? I asked. They damaged the unit, he replied. Scuff marks on the walls, some fixtures pulled loose, general mess left behind. I closed my eyes briefly. Of course they had, because if they couldn't take something with them, they would leave something broken instead. The landlord will assess the damage, he continued, but based on what I'm seeing, you'll likely receive a bill. I'll handle it, I said. And then we'll forward it, he added. I nodded again. Of course we will. There was a brief pause. Then he said something that stayed with me longer than anything else that morning. They expected you to fold, he said. That's what this entire performance was about. Pressure, confusion, urgency. I leaned back in my chair, staring at nothing. I know, I said quietly. But you didn't, he continued, and now they know that too. That mattered. More than the furniture, more than the apartment, more than the money. Because for the first time since this started, they had tested the boundary, and it hadn't moved. The strange thing about consequences is that they don't always arrive through the door you're watching. After the move out, everything on my end went quiet again. Not resolved. Just settled. The apartment was empty. The lease break was in motion. The movers were paid. The damage report came in. $1,200. I transferred the payment without hesitation, then forwarded the invoice and incident report to Mr. Harrison. He sent it along to Ethan's lawyer the same afternoon. Clean. Documented. Contained. For the first time in weeks, there was nothing immediate to react to. No calls. No texts. No threats dressed up as negotiations. Just space. And in that space, something unfamiliar started to return. Routine. I went back to my apartment. Not the old one, but a smaller place I had leased quietly a few days earlier. No exposed brick, no curated aesthetic, just light, clean lines and silence that belonged to me. I worked. I went to the gym. I had dinner with my sister without checking my phone every 5 minutes. The anger, which had been hovering just beneath the surface, began to thin out. Not disappear, just lose its urgency. And that's when things shifted again. Not because of anything I did, but because of something he did. It started with a message. Not from Ethan, from Lena again. Hey, I think you should know what's happening here. There was no screenshot this time. Just a short explanation. People saw his post, the one you saw. It didn't land the way he thought it would. I sat down slowly on the edge of my couch, reading the message twice. What do you mean? I typed back. The reply came quickly. The art world here is small. People talk. And, Claire, people knew how he was living. I didn't respond right away, because I already understood what she meant. He hadn't just been quietly supported. He had been visible. The apartment, the car, the lifestyle. None of it matched his position as an unpaid intern. At the time, I hadn't thought about how that looked from the outside. Now, apparently, everyone else was. Lena sent another message. One of the curators showed his post to someone else. Then it spread. Not officially, just conversations. I could picture it. Quiet discussions behind desks. Raised eyebrows. The subtle shift in tone when someone's name comes up and the story doesn't quite match the image. What real support looks like. The words from his post echoed in my mind. He had meant them as a weapon. Instead, they had become a question. Support from who? And for what? Lena's next message answered that without saying it directly. The director had a conversation with him yesterday. I felt something tighten slightly in my chest. Not anxiety, anticipation. And? I asked. There was a pause. Then, they said it's not a good fit going forward. I stared at the screen. Simple sentence. Massive consequence. He hadn't just lost funding. He had lost access, reputation, position. The very space he had been trying to build a future in. And I hadn't done anything to make that happen. Not directly. That was the part that stayed with me. Because if I had exposed him, posted receipts, defended myself publicly, dragged everything into the open, it would have felt like retaliation. This wasn't that. This was gravity. Lena sent one more message. I'm sorry, I thought you should know. I typed back after a moment. Thank you for telling me. Then I set my phone down and sat there in silence. Not celebrating. Not relieved. Just absorbing it. Because this was the part no one talks about. When someone hurts you deeply, there's this expectation spoken or not, that when consequences finally catch up to them, you'll feel something satisfying, something clean, vindication, closure. But what I felt was quieter. He had built a version of himself that depended on illusion, on access to things he hadn't earned yet, on proximity to a life that wasn't actually his. And when that illusion cracked, everything tied to it started slipping. Not because I pushed it, because it couldn't hold on its own. Later that week, another message came through, this time from a different mutual acquaintance. A screenshot, a post, not from Ethan, from Olivia. Her tone was different, less polished, less controlled. Some people can't handle being left. They'll try to sabotage your life instead of moving on. I read it once, then again, and this time I did feel something. Not anger, recognition. Because even now, even after everything that had happened, she was still trying to frame the story in a way that protected them. That made me the problem. The instability, the threat. I didn't respond. I didn't engage. I didn't even send it to my lawyer, because by then I understood something clearly. They needed the story to look a certain way, because without it, there was nothing holding their version of reality together. And reality, when left alone long enough, tends to correct itself. I stood up, walked to the window of my new apartment, and looked out over the city. The lights, the movement, the quiet rhythm of everything continuing exactly as it should. For the first time since that night, I didn't feel like I was waiting for something to happen. It already had. The collapse had started. And this time, I wasn't part of it. The last part didn't come with a confrontation. No final argument, no dramatic message, no late-night apology wrapped in regret. It came quietly, the way most endings do when they're real. A few days after Lena's message, Mr. Harrison called me. I was at my desk, halfway through reviewing a contract, when his name appeared on my screen. I answered immediately. Claire, he said, calm as always. I thought you'd like an update. I leaned back slightly in my chair. I'm listening. There was one final communication from Mr. Mercer's attorney, he continued. A letter. Strong tone. Lots of posturing. Claims about damages. Disruption. Intent to pursue legal action. I closed my eyes for a second. Of course there was. And? I asked. There was the faintest hint of amusement in his voice when he replied. I responded. I almost smiled. What did you say? There was a brief pause. Then, I reminded them, he said, that any attempt to initiate legal proceedings would be met with a counterclaim for the property damage, the mover's fees, legal costs, and a separate action for defamation based on the social media statements. He let that settle for a moment. We also included documentation, he added. Receipts, contracts, screenshots, a full record of communication. Of course we did. Structure, evidence, clarity. And, I repeated. This time there was no pause. Silence, he said simply. Complete silence. I let out a slow breath. Not relief. Not exactly. Just recognition. It was over. Not because they admitted anything. Not because they apologized. But because they had nothing left to stand on. No further contact? I asked. None, he confirmed. And I don't expect any. We ended the call shortly after. And for the first time since everything started, there was nothing pending. No next step. No unresolved thread waiting to be pulled. Just space. I thought that would be the end of it. But life, apparently, had one more piece to place. It came in the form of an email. From Lena. Simple subject line. Thought you should see this. I opened it slowly. There was a link attached. A public post. From Ethan's father. My chest tightened slightly as I clicked. Not because I was afraid, but because something about it felt final. The post was long, emotional, messy in a way that felt unfiltered. He didn't mention me by name, but he didn't need to. He talked about his son, about choices, about walking away from something stable for something that only looked better from a distance. He described it like watching someone step off solid ground because they were convinced there was something more exciting waiting just out of sight. There was a ladder in front of him, he wrote, and he chose to jump. I stared at that line for a long time. Then I kept reading. The rest filled in the gaps I hadn't cared enough to chase. Olivia wasn't what she appeared to be. Not stable, not established, not secure. The version of her that had walked into my life, confident, sharp, certain, had been built on appearances. Debt, unstable income, a lifestyle that looked expensive but wasn't supported by anything solid. And Ethan had tried to step into that world, without the structure that had been holding his previous one together. It didn't take long for things to crack. According to the post, the pressure hit fast. Financial strain, arguments, tension that escalated into something louder, messier, harder to ignore. The internship falling through didn't help. Neither did the whispers that had followed. Reputation, once damaged, doesn't stay contained. It spreads, quietly, relentlessly. Then came the final line that mattered. They're no longer together. I exhaled slowly. Not because I felt vindicated, because it made sense. Everything about it did. Two people building something on instability rarely create anything that lasts. The rest of the post was harder to read, not because it was dramatic, because it was honest. Ethan had moved back home. No apartment, no car, no position, no clear direction. Just reset. A full collapse back to where he had started. Maybe further. I closed the email and sat there for a long moment, my laptop still open in front of me. Processing it. Not the details. The weight of it. Because this was the part no one prepares you for. When the person who hurt you finally faces the consequences of their actions. And it doesn't feel like victory. It feels like closure. Not loud. Not triumphant. Just complete. That night, I stood in my new apartment, barefoot on the floor, looking out at the city lights again. It was a different view than before. Smaller. Simpler. Mine. There were no traces of him here. No shared history embedded in the walls. No memory tied to the furniture. Just space. And quiet. I thought about everything that had happened. The text. The silence. The audacity. The attempts to twist the narrative into something it wasn't. And then the unraveling. Not because I chased it. Not because I forced it. But because it couldn't hold. That was the truth I carried forward. You can support someone's dreams. You can believe in them. You can build something that feels solid and real. But you cannot be the foundation for someone who is willing to walk away from it. Because the moment they do, everything they were standing on goes with them. I didn't hear from Ethan again. No apology. No explanation. No attempt to reopen anything that had already closed. And for the first time since I met him, I didn't wonder why. I didn't need to. Some endings don't require answers. Just distance. And the quiet understanding that you survived something you didn't deserve. And came out of it with something you did. Clarity. My life is my own again. And this time, I intend to keep it that way.